In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can create your first scrapbook pages just using simple tools. So I have my cutting mat and I have a craft knife here, or you can use a rotary knife or a paper trimmer if you're more comfortable with those tools. I also have my repositionable glue here. That's the Herma dispenser. Plus I have my metal ruler with a cork back so you don't cut into the ruler as easily and the cork won't slip around. Plus, I have a piece of cardstock here for my paper mats, and it's just one color. Really, you do not have to have a whole collection of cardstock. And I have my grid paper here as well. Now, if you saw my previous video, the page kit video, I did introduce the grid paper and showed you how to use it with the scrapbook kits we sell. But we also sell the grid paper individually, and we have many different colors. We use this paper for every single scrapbook page we create. And a lot of people kind of wonder when they first see this paper, there's all these lines. That feels very restricting. And I'm going to tell you it's actually not. You have an endless amount of possibilities. Many of our customers love the grid lines because it keeps all your photos and paper mats neat and straight and organized. Plus, it gives your pages a professional look as if a graphic designer created your page. So today I'm going to show you how to scrapbook with the grid paper, and hopefully by the end you'll see the benefit of it and why it's great for a beginner. So let's get started. Right here I have a 12 by 12 sheet of Mosaic Moments grid paper, and I will be showing you how to cut your mats and photos properly to fit the measurements. And I have these photos here. For today's video, I am going a slower pace, so if you want to watch this video and you decide you would like to use the Mosaic Moments system, you're welcome to come back and create a page along with me. And I have a sheet of cardstock here that's a speckled light gray color, and basically what I did was make sure it was going to be contrasting on the green. I could have also gone with a darker color for another type of contrast, but I also want to make sure that the photo mats were going to let my photos pop. So basically you just want to find one color that coordinates with your background and also is contrasting over the background and still let your photos pop on the mats. And as you can see here, I only have one color. Multiple colors of cardstock and pattern paper can be collected over time, but for now, just go simple. And I want to introduce you to our free resource. If you go to mosaicmoments.com/patterns, you will see our pattern gallery filled with many layout ideas. I do have a video that teaches you how to navigate the pattern gallery if you want to go check that out. But today I decided on a particular pattern, number 836. And what you can do is click View Pattern Details and you put in your email address, and it will send you to this page with the measurements. So you can look at this online, but you can also print the pattern out, which I am doing for this video. So you can see this button that says print this pattern. So you can go ahead and choose a pattern you like and print it out. So no matter your style of scrapbooking, the most overwhelming part is getting started with that page, because you look at that blank sheet of paper and you're like, how am I going to lay this out? What am I going to do? So our solution to that was the pattern gallery to help you feel less overwhelmed and that you have a place to start. And of course, patterns can be adjusted based on the photos you have. But if you take a look here, I have the measurements. So if you print out the patterns, you will have the measurements for each of these design spots. So I'm going to be looking at those measurements today and show you how to cut everything. But I definitely think you should go check out our pattern gallery and get some ideas on how to lay out your scrapbook pages. And I'm telling you, it will help you feel less overwhelmed about getting started with the process. So right now I'm just planning out where my photos are going to go. I'm deciding where could they fit. So that first one I figured, that's got to go in that 4x6 design spot. This one looks like it could fit in that where that pink block is. And by the way, as a beginner, the colors don't really matter for right now. These are more for the dies. So if you want to learn more about that, go check out our next video. But for right now, if you're hand cutting with the simple tools, you just need to kind of get an idea of the size here. So I think I want this photo to fit in that square space. So I just like to look it over and see, can I crop that down to a square? And then for the little spots, you just want to use photos like this one, where it's like leaves or flowers, or something like this, where the photos were taken at a distance. So I know that the subjects can fit in those little squares. If you don't have any photos that fit in those tiny spaces, this could be a good spot to add in something like pattern paper or other embellishments. And I have these two strips here, and I decided I'm just gonna use the cardstock to fill those spaces. I could also fill it with what we call a detail photo, so that'd be photos of flowers or brick or something a little bit fun and interesting to fill there as well. So we have a lot of different patterns on the gallery, but as beginner, you want to look for patterns with mostly larger design spots like the one I have now. And again, if there are some smaller spaces like mine, you can just fill them in with cardstock and pattern paper if you don't have photos. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut my paper mats with this 12 by 12 sheet, and I have the measurements here, and I'm going to cut what is the two pink spaces, and they are 5.5 by 4.375 inches. So some people really like having the exact measurements, but I'm also going to show you an easy way that we cut these using our count and cut system. So again, the ones I'm making, they're going to fit 4 by 5 squares on our grid paper here. So this 4 squares in width, there's 4 inches, plus you have to count for the little gaps in between each square. So those gaps are 1/8 of an inch wide. So when you cut for the grid paper, you have to look at how many squares plus how many gaps you're cutting. So you're really cutting 4 inches plus 3/8, because there's 3 1/8 inches between each square. So right now I'm measuring out 4 inches, and then I'm going to add on 3/8. So that's 4 big squares plus 3 little squares. So our count and cut system is for every square you cut, you add 1 less eighth. So I cut this 4 squares and 3/8 in width. Okay, I'm going to show this again. And I do have another video about the count and cut system and about the grid paper if you want to learn more about this. So this time I'm going to be cutting for 5 squares in length, and there's also 4/8 this time. So I'm counting 5 big squares plus 4 little squares. So again, it's always 1 less gap than square. So if I was cutting a mat that was 3 inches long, I'd have 2/8. So as you can see here, I'm able to cut another mat that's the same exact size as the previous one, plus I have an extra 1-inch strip here, and all of them will fit the measurements of the grid paper. It's amazing. So I just wanted to show you this cutting method, or the way I'm just cutting the mats, because it saves you on paper. So on a 12 by 12 sheet of grid paper, if you do it right, you can get 2 of those rectangular shapes plus a 1-inch strip. You can also do this with an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. You just won't have the 1-inch strip at the end, but you can get the 2 rectangle shapes I just cut. So what I like to do is start with the top left corner. So I laid down that strip on the top left on purpose, because as beginner, a lot of people kind of don't know where to put everything. So I always say start with that top left corner, and then everything else from there can be built on. So since I put in that strip, I know that the pink on the pattern paper, that rectangle goes below that. And I know that this rectangle goes in that top right corner. And what you want to do is make sure you line it up to that left corner, basically, of that place you're going to put it. And I use this slide and guide method, so don't plop the paper mat down because it'll be crooked, but you want to slide it and guide it so it just covers the top line and the left line of that section you're covering. So I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions about anything in the video today, let me know. We also have other videos that talk about the hand cutting system. And again, there is a video about the dies. So if you're finding the hand cutting a bit overwhelming, you might find the dies a lot easier. So go check that out as well. The hand cutting is mainly beneficial because it saves you a lot of money as a beginner because the dies are a bigger investment. So if you're trying to save on money for now, this is the hand cutting method's the great way to go. All right, now I'm going to cut out this big rectangle, which is 6.625 by 4.375 inches. So you're going to have the measurements there. Plus, I'm going to be cutting out that square, which is 4 3/8 by 4 3/8. So I'm going to show you how you can get this in just a few cuts. So again, they're both 4 squares in length on the grid. So I counted out 4 big squares and 3 little squares. So that's 4 3/8. Now, as you can see, I cut that down. And I'm going to turn it over to the side here. And I just want to refer to the pattern again real quick here. So I want to make one of my pieces 6 squares long, and as you can see, there's 5 gaps. So remember, for every big square, you need the room for the little squares too, or the little gaps. So I counted 6 big squares, or 6 inches, and then I counted 5 little squares, or that is also 5/8 if you're measuring it out. And the next piece is going to be a square, 4 squares in length. It's already cut 4 squares one way. I just need to count 3 little squares this time. So I start with the little ones because that's what made it easier for my mind. And then I started counting 4 big squares, or if it's easier for you, count the 4 big squares and then 3 little squares. And again, I have the little strip left over at the end. So was that amazing? I just did this whole page. Well, not the whole page is done, but I did all the mats in just a few little cuts. The trick is to look at what pieces are the same width, and then you're able to basically cut multiple of them in just a few cuts. All right, so of course I glued it down. I put a little bit of glue in each corner and in the center, and I'm going to add this strip here. Again, I like to use repositionable glue, so that way you can put the glue on the cutting mat and then transfer it to your page without having to add more glue. And the glue does become permanent over time, so you don't have to worry about replacing the glue with permanent. So now I have all my paper mats placed that I want to use. The 3 little squares, I will not be using mats, but you certainly could cut mats for that section as well. Now I'm going to crop my photos to fit on the larger mats. So if you saw the page kit video, this is actually going to be pretty much the same process actually. So again, I like the repositionable glue because even though I glued the mats down on the grid paper, I like to bring them back to crop my photos. So I personally like having the photos be 3/8 smaller than the mat size. And I have all 4x6 photos here. So the nice thing is the photo is 4 inches width and it's already 3/8 less than the side of the mat that is 4 3/8 in length. So you actually don't have to worry about cropping that down if you have a design spot that's that large. But for this photo, I will need to crop it smaller. And I'm trying to place my photo. I like to put the photo 1/8 inch away from the mat, but you also want to make sure that you can see the grid lines all around it. Sometimes I've put the photo right up against the edge of the cutting mat, and then you can't really see where your ruler needs to go. So I'm just putting the paper mat kind of in the section I want to crop my photo. So now I'm going to use my knife and ruler to crop my photo so it measures 3/8 less than the mat size. So I just have my ruler and my paper here because I want to make sure I crop along the right lines. So I decided to cut, let's see, 2 little squares or 2/8 less on the bottom here. And then I just need to crop off enough so it's 1/8 less on the top. So I counted just one little square from the mat size, not the photo size. If I took 3 eighths off the photo, it wouldn't be small enough to fit on the mat, obviously. Yeah, and if you want to review this process, if you didn't see my Paige kit video, you can watch that as well to learn about the measurements for cutting your photos. And as you can see, my photo fits the mat perfectly. The idea is to make sure the paper mat is even all the way around the photograph. So even if you want to do more than 3 eighths, which is what I've been doing, or you can do just 1/8 less or 2 eighths less, the key is to make sure that you're consistent, and that way you get an even photo mat. Now I'm using my square piece here and I'm trying to line it up on the part of the cutting mat where I have room to add my photo next to it as well. And when you cut, well, first of all, you want to place your mat, if you're right-handed, on the left side of a thick line. If you're left-handed, you would put it on the right side of the thick line. And I also place it underneath a thick line. So the top of the paper mat is underneath that line. And again, I'm putting my photo 1/8 inch away. And again, this is a square that is 4 3/8 in width, so I didn't have to crop down the photo in the one direction, but the height needs to be cropped. So again, I'm going to take my mat and use the ruler and maybe a sheet of paper to figure out which lines I want to crop along here to make sure I don't crop out anything I don't want to. And for this one, I decided to go ahead and crop the top right where well, I should say the same line as the top of the paper mat here. So on the bottom here, I'm going to take off 3 eighths from the mat size. So this is why I like having the mats done first, so that way you can put them on the cutting mat and it makes it so much easier to crop your photo and you don't really have to worry about measuring all that much and figuring out the exact measurement. You just have to trim off a little bit less than the mat width. All right, I have my square photo here and it looks perfect. Isn't that awesome? So this large block is large enough for a whole 4x6 photograph, so I don't have to worry about cropping this one down. But many people are concerned when they get here because they see it's not going to be an even mat. So I'm just going to show you a really easy thing I like to do is I just like to take the photo and make sure it's even around 3 of the sides. So definitely here the top and bottom and on the right side. And the gap on the left I'm going to save for journaling. So I'm going to go ahead and crop the photo. It's basically the same process I've already shown, and I'll show you how to cut the little squares. All right, I'm going to show you how to cut the 3 little squares, and I have 2 bonus things for you. I have a bonus tool, plus if you get our cutting mat, which I have here on the table, I'm going to show you a bonus tip. So these squares, as shown here, are 2 1/8 by 2 1/8, or if we look at the count and cut system, it's going to be 2 big squares plus 1 little square, so 2 inches and 1/8 gap. So I'm putting the glue on here as usual, just in the corners and some in the center. For these small pieces, I tried to put the glue kind of where the subject I'm going to cut out is. All right, so this time I don't have a mat, so I'm going to cut it to the exact grid paper measurements with the gap. So because I'm not cutting it smaller like I did the other photos because they were being put on mats. So I'm just taking my time and making sure that the lines I cut on the mat here are going to crop my subject the way I would like it to be. So I just trimmed off a little bit here, and if the measurements are a little bit tricky, what I like to do is crop it and then line it up on a thicker line, so that way it's easier to count the 2 big squares and the 1 little square. So you can just figure out kind of like which line to cut it on at the beginning and then move it over to a different line. Because sometimes I don't like sitting there and having to figure out, okay, which line do I need to put it on again? So I just like to move it over if that's easiest. And of course, I need to do the same thing on the other side. It's going to be the same length, where it's 2 squares plus 1 little square, or 2 inches and an eighth of an inch. So again, I like to I'm using my knife instead of a piece of paper here, but I'm just kind of looking at it and seeing, okay, where do I want to line this up? Because I want the lighthouse to be centered within that square. So I'm going to get it centered as possible. So I'm just cutting it up. And again, I cut one side, and to make things easier, I'm just realigning it to a thicker line so I can count it or measure it a little bit easier. All right, so this is done, and my lighthouse, it's pretty centered. It's not perfectly centered, but that's okay. And I'm gonna add a little more glue. Since you crop down the photo smudge, you do lose the other glue, so it's gonna add a little more to the corners. And there you go. It is perfectly measured to fit the grid and covered up that 2x2 square section. So now I'm getting into the bonus things here. The first one is an item we sell. I'm going to glue the back of this photo first. So I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I'm going to glue this first and line it up on the cutting mat as usual. So again, I'm lining my photo on the left side of the thick line and below the thick line. If you look at the top of the photo, it's below the thick line. And this item is called our quick glance guide, and I do have a video that shows you how to use this if you want to go check it out, but I will be showing it in this video. And it has all the measurements. The top is for a mosaic section, which we talk about that in a separate video. I'm not talking about making mosaic cuts in this video, but the bottom section shows you how to cut the bigger pieces. So if I look at this section here, it's going to measure a 2x2 square on the grid paper. Now, you do not cut on the quick glance guide. I really want to emphasize this is not something you cut on. It is a tool to help you know which lines to cut along with your ruler. So that's what I used it for. I used a quick glance guide of my photo, and I knew I need to cut on this line, and I'm going to bring it back. So I kind of put it over my subject, and then you can see I'm putting it down to make sure I know which lines to cut along. All right, so now I know to cut on this line, so that way you don't have to pick the photo up and figure out the measurement again. You can just use a quick glance guide. So it is a really nice tool. A lot of people use this, and it's great because that way you know what your subject's kind of going to look like when you crop it down. So I'm just showing you here real quick. You can see 2 1/8 by 2 1/8. That's the measurement you need. And there's also enough on here to make a 3x3 square or 3x4 square or 3x5 design spot space. And I used it again. This time it's a little easier because I cropped the photo the one way, so it's easier to see where the lines need to go. So I'm putting my quick lens guide back, and I can see which line I need to cut on next. So again, super handy tool. A lot of people love this tool. Even people who decide not to use our system will even get this tool because it is really handy if you're cropping your photos. So you can get that on our website, snapandcrop.com. It's called our Quick Glance Guide. And so that is one way to make the measurements much easier and faster, is using that tool. All right, for my second bonus item, this is going to probably make you want to get our mat. I'm just saying, our mat has this awesome tool on the back. So this is the front side, and I've been showing you how to measure this way, but we have another grid on the back that makes it easier for you to crop those larger spaces. It also has the measurements here. So if you can't remember what the measurements should be, it does have that guide on the back of the mat. But we have this special grid, and I'm going to show you how to use it. It'll make it so much easier if you feel like measuring out the pieces and doing the count and cut system, and you're feeling like this is already feeling overwhelming. I'm going to show you how to use the back of this because you might be like, oh wait, that's easier. So as you can see, I have my quick glance guide over the square section, and it's a 2x2 section. And the numbers don't have the exact measurements. They go from 1 to 10 because that's how many squares you're covering on the grid paper. And it says right in the bottom of the mat, start at the dot. So what I'm doing now is just adding my glue to the back of the photo as usual. And you always start at this big dot here. So everything needs to measure along that dot. And I'm placing, for now, the photo so my subject lines up in that 2x2 grid section. Okay, so I have my photo here. And what you are going to do is look at this dot, and then of course count to what number of squares you're covering on the grid paper. And then you're going to take your ruler, put it over the photo, and you're going to cut along that line. Okay? And then you're going to take your ruler and put it where the dot is on that first line, and you're going to cut on this one as well. All right, super easy so far. Now, it's really important to do this. Flip the photo over, and you're going to still work from the dot again. And I have my house. I actually decided to line it up with that center line where the one is to make it easier so I know the house is centered. And I'm going to do the same thing again. Since it's 2x2 squares, I cut along the 2 here, and I'm cutting along where this dot is as well. And there you go. I have a 2 1/8 by 2 1/8 inch square, and it was so easy. So, like I said, if the first part of the video seemed like too hard or something, just so you know, there is that awesome grid on the back, and you can see I cut that in no time. Now, you will not be able to use it for the mat sizes, but again, it's pretty easy because your mats will already be cut. So that is an awesome tool. Go check out that cutting mat. All right, so my page is pretty much done. I just want to show you a bonus idea. So I decided to use these little strips for journaling spots. So I'm just going to show you an easy thing I do to add the journaling. So I have my pencil and a good eraser here. I mentioned these tools in one of the previous videos. And I like to take my ruler and just measure out where I want to put the lines. I'm just putting them down every 1/4 of an inch, basically. And so you can just take the time to figure out how many lines you want or how large you want to make your letters and figure out how many spaces you want for your journaling. And then I have the lines drawn in with pencil, and then I'm just going to go over the wording or the journaling with the pencil as well. So I can write out, make sure everything I write out will fit in the space. Make sure it's okay, and then if I am happy with that, I will go over it with a pen. This is the Zig pen. You can get this at places like Scrapbook.com. I recommend getting a good craft pen for your scrapbook. So once I have that done, it dries very quickly, so I'm able to just erase those pencil lines, and because I use the repositionable glue, I can take it from off the mat and put it back on the grid paper. I decided to switch spaces because I wrote out the first part of the journaling I want to do, and the second part will go on the other strip. So now I'm going to add journaling to this side where my 4x6 photo is. I kind of mentioned that earlier, so I'm going to go ahead and fill that in. And my page is officially done. And I have to tell you, this page is considered a beginner layout, and I love how it's very photo focused. I have multiple photos on here, and that's really what makes the page stand out overall. But I'm actually pretty amazed at how well this page turned out. It's basically mainly photos. You notice I didn't add any pattern paper. I didn't add any embellishments. Really, you can make amazing looking layouts just using the basic tools. And I did want to talk about the basic tools because as a beginner, you may not want to invest a lot of money yet in your scrapbooking. But if you do, you're welcome to check out our next video about die cutting. Even if you're not ready to do die cutting, I recommend checking it out to see if you'd like to invest in that going forward. But go ahead, check that out. And if you want to learn more about our hand cutting system, go check out this playlist that we have on our YouTube channel. All right, thank you so much for watching, and hope to see you in the next video.